Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me today for our next PL installment of the three-dimensional science series. Today, we're going to be looking at how middle school and high school students can engage with science probes. Now, science probes are something that have been around for quite a while in science instruction, and the science probes that we're going to be looking at can be found on CTLS Teach, and I'm going to walk you through and show you exactly where to find those on CTLS Teach. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we're going to get started. All right, so today's training is right in line with our unfinished learning priorities that we have for our district. The two we're going to be strategically looking at today are prioritizing instructional standards and also a strategically aligned assessment model. So in keeping with these priorities, using science probes will actually hit on both of those priorities, and I'm excited to share with you the impact they can have on student learning and achievement. Here are our balanced science instruction priorities for this school year. And this PL session will hit upon teachers moving from 1 dimensions to 3 dimensions of science instruction, and also utilizing prioritized standards to address unfinished learning. All right, so what is three-dimensional science teaching? Well, if we look at this balanced instruction document that we use here in Cobb, you can see that we have the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts embedded within our balanced instruction document. This is the way that we promote and teach science here in Cobb. We are going to have a systematic study of the physical and natural world through questioning, observations, and experimentation and investigation, where students can understand and evaluate and design solutions to problems, everyday problems. Also, we're going to center on investigation of the natural and engineered world through data collection, experimentation, and that helps our students acquire the knowledge of key scientific principles while also building their inquiry skills. So if you look here, what exactly is three-dimensional science learning? It is those disciplinary core ideas connected with those science and engineering practices, and that's what science and engineers do. And then our last dimension is those cross-cutting concepts, and those are those big themes that can cut across the other 3 dimensions, such as cause and effect, systems and models, structure and function, stability and change. So those are things that we can see throughout the grade levels. So let's get into uncovering student ideas with science probes. This is my friend, Miss Paige Keeley, and she is fabulous, and she is the one that really started the movement of science probes within science instruction. And she now has over, I want to say, 20 to 30 books of formative assessment probes that you can use with your students. So this is Miss Paige, and today I'm going to be using some examples out of the Uncovering Student Ideas in Earth and Environmental Science book. We have copies of those here at the Instructional Support Center, and you might have them in your library already, but every Cobb teacher, every science teacher in your grade level science course has a copy of the probes, and I'm going to show you how to access those today. And this is an example of a probe. You can see right here. You can see that probe here. It's called the mitten problem. This is what the probes look like. Students are going to be given a scenario, and then they're going to identify what student they agree with, and then they have to explain their science thinking. So let's get into exactly how we can utilize science probes in the 6 through 12 science classroom. All right. So I'm going to read a scenario with you while you look at this picture. I'm going to read a scenario through, and I want you to just think about what I'm saying and visualize how this teacher is using a assessment probe in her classroom. Picture an 8th grade classroom about to begin a unit on Earth history that includes several lessons on plate tectonics. Their teacher, Dr. Kakar, was aware that students had learned basic ideas about Earth's plates in 6th grade. She decided to use the formative assessment probe describing Earth's plates to elicit students' prior knowledge about tectonic plates. She then decided to use this information to plan her instruction while simultaneously piquing students' interest in the topic and promoting thinking. Dr. Kakar read the related research summaries and the teacher notes. She was interested in learning more about the Brent and Ford research study on middle school students' ideas about plate tectonics that was cited in the summary. She noticed in the references section that the article was published in the NSTA journal Science Scope. Because Dr. Kakar is an NSTA member, she had access to all of the archived NSTA journals electronically. She found the article and read it. She realized that students held a myriad of ideas about plate tectonics and Earth's processes. She was particularly struck by the comment that many students have about plate tectonics, and they have been influenced by the language, visual representations, and models that teachers use. Providing an opportunity for students to surface and express their ideas would help her focus on planning instruction that would build a bridge between where her students are in their thinking and where they need to be in order to have that conceptual understanding of plate tectonics and Earth processes. Dr. Kakar decided to use the claims card strategy as a way for students to make their thinking visible. She liked this strategy because it gave students an opportunity to use the scientific practice of constructing an explanation and using it to engage in argumentation with their peers. She printed onto cards each of the 15 statements that made up the answer choices on the probes. She distributed a single card to each student. Because she had 18 students in her class, she made up 3 additional cards. Each student read the statement on his or her card as a claim. The students then had to support or refute the claim using scientific reasoning supported by evidence. After each student shared and defended or refuted his or her claim, other students could also add ideas to support or refute the claim. After students finished discussing each claim, the class voted on whether to accept or reject each claim based on the evidence and the strength of the argument. Dr. Kakar then put the claims on a chart and sorted them by 2 columns titled Initial Claims We Support and Initial Claims We Reject. Without passing judgment on students' initial ideas, Dr. Kakar listened carefully and made note of ideas to address in subsequent instruction. For example, one student made the claim, earthquakes and volcanoes can be found along plate boundaries. She explained the evidence for the claim by sharing what she previously learned about the Pacific Rim of Fire. Other students added ideas such as the number of earthquakes in California and even mentioned the San Andreas Fault. One student added that earthquakes and volcanoes follow the pattern of the plate boundaries, but they can also be found in other areas. A student mentioned how she used to live in Missouri, where there was once a powerful earthquake back in the 1800s. When they voted, the entire class agreed to put that event in the initial claim we support column. Another student shared the claim, tectonic plates float on top of hot liquid magma. He supported the claim by explaining that most of Earth's interior is molten and that plates rest on the top of the molten material. He even drew a picture of a cross section of Earth to support his thinking. Dr. Kakar noted that this claim is a common misconception that he will need to address in subsequent instruction. After the class presented each claim and their arguments in favor of acceptance or rejection and recorded the claims in the claims columns, Dr. Kakar had students form small groups to research 3 or 4 assigned claims and prepare a new argument with scientific evidence to support or reject the claim. This constructivist approach provided an opportunity for students to own the content rather than merely filling their heads with information. Dr. Kakar carefully read the Ford and Taylor article again, making note of their suggested strategies for moving student thinking forward, as well as suggestions for instruction and further assessment in the probe teacher notes. He kept those suggestions in mind to use while the students worked on revising or refining their claims. So this is just a little snippet of how one middle school teacher uses the probes in her classroom to gauge student misconceptions at the beginning of a unit. Now let's see how you can utilize this in your classroom. So formative assessments, we use them in all of our core content areas. Formative assessment is what drives our instruction. Formative assessment is an approach in which we developed deeper conceptual understanding through the development of our own thinking and talking. We're expressing our ideas, and it also provides a window for us to examine our students' thinkings and determine next steps based on their conceptual understanding. And I found this quote in a study I was reading recently, and it really resonated with me. And that is, research shows that children learn best when they first surface their ideas before launching into investigations, activities, reading, and or other opportunities to learn. Meaning, we really want to gauge how our students think about some concepts before we actually teach it. And then we can adjust our instructional sequence based on what they do or do not know. So surfacing initial ideas and recognizing when their ideas are changing as they construct new understanding is a powerful way to teach and learn. So a lot of us used to think of diagnostic assessments, right? This is something that you do at the beginning of a unit, and it lets us know where the student is and compared to either prerequisite standards or ideas or concepts that we want them to have some background knowledge on. So if you look at this chart, a diagnostic assessment helps us uncover and examine ideas of children and what they bring to learning. And that's considered diagnostic. Formative, the teacher needs to think about how to best design, choose, or modify a lesson to best address those preconceptions students bring to their learning. Diagnostic assessment becomes formative assessment when us as teachers, we use that data to make decision about instruction that's going to move our students towards our intended learning targets. So the most important step is to decide on the instructional path that would work best in whatever context based on your students' thinking. So we're going to look at these probes as a formative assessment. We're going to give it at the beginning of a unit to gauge our students' conceptions, and then we're going to use it at the end to see how their thinking has changed. All right, so formative assessment being an essential feature of a learning focused science classroom. What does that mean? So let's talk about the probes specifically, the Keeley probes. So first off, each probe is designed to target one or more concepts, and it says elementary students, but this is obviously middle and high, same thing. In the probe, and I'm going to show you in just a second what they look like and what all you get with them. You're given a brief scientific explanation, and that's going to accompany each probe, and it provides clarification of the scientific context that underlies the probe. And that's for you, for the teacher. Before choosing a probe, it's important to be clear about what the probe is designed to do. So I really want you to take the time to read the purpose. So the purpose of the probe, and that will help you decide if the probe best fits your intended learning target. And then you're also given suggestions for administering the probes to students, including response methods, ways to use props, how to demonstrate the scenario, and also modifications and differentiation techniques as well. So you're given all of that information with the probe. So let's take a look at an example. So this is a probe right here. It's called Atoms and Cells. As you can see here, it has a chart. It says the chart below shows a variety of things sorted into two different groups. Group A, leaf of a plant, horse's muscle, cap of a mushroom, baby elephant, seed of a bean plant, blood. Group B, spoonful of salt, piece of metal, diamond necklace, protein, sugar cube, air. Circle the statement you think best describes the two groups. A, both groups are made up of cells. B, both groups are made up of atoms. C, group A is made up of cells, group B is made up of atoms. D, group A is made up of cells and atoms, group B is made up of atoms. E, Some things in group A are made up of cells and some things in group B are made up of cells. And F, group A and group B are both made up of cells and atoms. Explain your thinking, provide an explanation for your answer. That's it. That's a typical probe. You're given some information and the students have to select an answer choice that best fits their science thinking, and then they have to explain that thinking. So where can I find these probes? You are going to find these probes on CTLS Teach. I'm going to show you right now. So here we are in the 7th grade life science course. This is the home page where you have your prioritized standards teaching and learning framework. You're going to click on course resources, and these are all the course resources. Here in small text, you're going to see Page Keeley Science Probes. Click on the tab at the bottom of the spreadsheet for 7th grade. Username, your Cobb email, password, NSTA 2017 exclamation point. If you have trouble printing, click I want to register with eBooks now and create an account. So here's where we go. You're going to click on Page Keeley Science Probes and it's going to pull up the database for you. It's very small. We're going to make that bigger. There we go. You'll see this is 6th grade. We're going to scroll down to 7th grade life science probes. You have your standards and each probe that aligns with that standard along with the content. And then you have a live link that will take you to the probe. And also it tells you what volume it's in and the probe number. So we did atoms and cells. It's right here. I'm going to click on that link. And ProQuest is going to come up and you have the option of reading online or downloading a book or downloading the chapter. I always do the download PDF chapter and it pops up all the chapter along with all of the probes. So here is our probe 6, atoms and cells. I'm going to download the PDF. Download. And it's going to pop up here, and here is our probe. Now let's walk through exactly what each part of the probe is. So here is the student sheet that you would actually give to your students or project onto the panel. Here is the purpose, the teacher notes. This is my favorite part. You get 6 pages of teacher notes. So you have the purpose of the probe. The purpose of this probe is to elicit students' ideas about the smallest parts of living and non-living things. The probe is designed to determine how students distinguish between cells and atoms in living and non-living context. So that's the purpose. If that's what we want to know, if our students know, then we want to use this probe. Then you have the explanation, a very brief scientific explanation of the correct answer. So for this probe, the best answer is D. Group A is made up of cells and atoms. Group B is just made up of atoms. Then your curricular instructional considerations. You're going to scroll down to middle school or high school students, and this is going to give you information on instructional considerations. Then you have administering the probe. It actually gives you ideas on how to administer the probe. You have your NGSS related ideas for your grade level bands, research related to the topic that you can read through, suggestions for instruction and assessment, and then related NSTA journal articles and your references. So you get all of this information with your probe. And again, that's in your grade level course resources tab. All right, so thinking about how could we introduce probes in our science courses, 6th through 8th grade, whole group intro, you can throw it up on the Recordex panel and do it whole group and have a discussion like Dr. Kakar did in our read aloud scenario, or you can have your students do it independently and collect those and you group students that way and modify your instructional sequence by looking at the papers that way. You could do mystery bags or video clips. Let's look at an example of a video science probe. This science probe can boost engagements with your student if you do more of a video probe. So this science teacher has taken one of the probes that's called an apple in the dark, and he has created a video to help his students work on this formative
probe. For this one, we need one red apple and a really dark
There's no sound.
place. A place where no light can get in. Where could that be? Let's imagine you and a friend go hiking away from civilization and decide to explore a cave at midnight. At midnight, on a moonless night. And it's a deep cave. A cave with downward twists and turns. Using a lantern, you and your friend eventually come to an open space. You stop, take out the red apple from your backpack, and you turn off the lantern. It is completely dark. There is no light coming from anywhere. Choose the statement that you believe best describes how you would see the apple in the dark, and then describe your thinking. Provide an explanation for your answer.
All right, so that's an example of how you can use a video probe to engage your students to uncover their ideas. Also, to use it as a summative assessment piece. So we're using it for a formative at the beginning, and then you can use it as a summative assessment piece at the end of your unit, utilizing something called the line of learning strategy. So at the end of a unit or a lesson, you're going to have your students draw a line in their science journals or their notebooks and revisit the probe and ask students to consider changing their initial claim and writing it down under the line of learning. This is where they would provide evidence of why their initial claim is different and why they changed their answer based on evidence from their learning throughout the unit. So let's check out how this teacher does this.
We are going to open up our Be a Scientist notebook to page 106, and we are going to go back to our temperature drop that we started with for this. And we're just going to look at what you guys put, who you agreed with. Did you agree with Mrs. Collins or Mr. Collins? And looking back at our situation, we saw that Mr. and Mrs. Collins live in Tampa, Florida. They enjoy the warm winter weather, and the average temperature in in February is the mild 70 degrees Fahrenheit. This year, there was a week of very cold temperatures. It dropped to 38 degrees in one day, and it almost snowed. Mr. and Mrs. Collins were surprised that it got so cold, and this is what they said. Mr. Collins said, "This is a big change in our weather." And Mrs. Collins said, "Wow, this is a big change in our climate." And you guys put down who you agreed with, and you put why you agreed with them. So I want you to look back at it, and I want you to see if you agree with your a week and a half ago self, or if you would change your thinking.
All right. So as you can see, this teacher has instructed her students to look back at the scenario that they did at the beginning of the unit before they learned about climate and temperature. And now she's having them revisit the scenario and look at their initial claim and see if they would change it based on what they've learned through the unit. So that is how you can use a science probe as a summative assessment as well. So remember, one way to support inquiry for conceptual change is to start with uncovering our students' ideas before launching into an investigation. A probe is not formative unless you use that information to modify, adapt, or change your instruction. And that way we're providing increased opportunities to learn those science concepts. And it's the explanation of the probe, not the answer selection that the students chose from, that provides the bulk of the data that we're going to use to drive our instruction. If for more information on Paige Keeley's Uncovering Student Ideas in Science, please hit me up by email or Christian as well. We would love to help you integrate those science probes in your classroom. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time for another 3D science series. Deal.